Testing? Okay. Cheers. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Squirrel Hill Historical Society program. I'm Helen Wilson. I'm Vice President of Squirrel Hill Historical Society and also the newsletter editor. And I'm going to start by introducing the members of the board and our officers, some of whom aren't able to be here tonight. Jim Hammond, our president, is enjoying life in Florida. Todd Miller and Toby Chapman are our program coordinators, and they're not here tonight. Audrey Glickman is our media specialist, whose work, yes, she deserves a great round of applause. And Tony Indovina, who is our email coordinator. Stanley Klein, I know you're here. Back in the back is our membership coordinator. Evelyn Young, our treasurer, is not here. And our other board members are Charles Suckup, Todd Wilson right there, Wayne Bossinger, and Dr. Jean Binstock. Our webmaster is Janine Michael. I also want to thank my sister Agnes and my old friend Drew Pravasnik for manning the table back there. And a few announcements. Our 2024 membership drive is continuing. Our membership year runs from January 1st to December 31st of every year. So anybody who either joins or renews now, your membership is good until 2024, December 31st, 2024. Let's see, we definitely thank everybody who's renewed so far. We really appreciate your support. And the main perk of membership, since these meetings are free and open to anybody, the main perk is the monthly newsletter that we send out. And the newsletter contains information about our trips, our walking tours rather, the programs that we've scheduled, and any events like, say, the Lawrenceville Historical Society event that would be of interest to our members, and East Liberty Historical Society. We do publish those in our newsletter as well.
And for the newsletter, Helen deserves a big round of applause. She puts it together every month and with all kinds of fun facts. It's worth the price of membership.
But, which reminds me that if you would like to contribute an article to the newsletter, please do. We're always looking for people to contribute articles. For example, Lauren Winkler has done a great project on she's tracing the development of telegraphs in the United States, which will be an upcoming talk next year. So, okay. Also, another perk is that there's a password-protected members page on our website that has every single newsletter that we've ever published. So if you need to just look up some topic that we've published since, I think, 2014, they're in there. So, any other announcements? Tony?
Very briefly, on the Neil Log House. Thank you. Helen invited me just to give an update on the Neil Log House, and you should be seeing the updates in our newsletter. Maybe you're tiring of them, but the progress is remarkable. After 3 years of being incorporated as a group, we're actually finalizing the second historic reconstruction of the Neil Log House at the beginning of December. If you haven't seen it, if you don't know where it is, it's at the top of the golf course. I think it's hole number 5. Circuit Drive is near the top of the Serpentine Road, so it's that end, the uphill end of the golf course. If you drive by and you haven't seen it in a while, you're really going to be blown away by a beautiful, sparkling, new chinking or grouting. All the masonry's been redone. The roof is about 90% done. That is literally all that. A new door and a new window is all that has to happen, besides some interior electrical work. And we just keep proceeding with other phases. We're going to have a landscape phase. There's going to be fencing, grant-funded fencing going in. The ultimate goal is going to be next year. We hope to open it to the public July of '24, so keep reading the updates.
Thank you, Tony. And I did forget one announcement. This is a call for volunteers from the Heinz History Center, the Dietrich Library and Archives. They're launching Pittsburgh History Forge, which is an online platform that brings together historic information from census records, maps, and other sources. And the information will be layered on over a Google map, resulting in powerful tools for engaging local history. And if you're interested, the Heinz History Center is looking for volunteers to help with transcribing records from the 1920 census, focusing on Pittsburgh's Hill District neighborhood. Volunteers will view census records and other data and enter it onto the History Forge website. And after a training session, you can work from home. So if you're interested, because the website address for this is very long, I have some forms in the back. If you're interested, pick up one of those. Lauren, did you want to say anything more about it?
I just learned about it fairly recently, but it's a new project, and it's mapping the census data. As you know, the Hill District is one of the places where a lot of people came from the Hill District to Squirrel Hill. So you may very well find your relatives in that data. I know mine are there. So if you're interested in where people lived before Squirrel Hill, this is an excellent opportunity to learn more about that. So the training is on December 2nd, in person at the History Center. They're going to have another one virtually. And yeah, I hope you guys can help out.
So if you're interested, pick up a flyer in the back. And, okay, and no more announcements, so. Let's see. Frank Kurtik is our speaker this evening. He's a former docent and events manager at Heinz Chapel. Before that, he worked for the Heinz Family Office and the Heinz Family Foundation, and was the University of Pittsburgh's first photo archivist in, I don't know why I'm having trouble reading, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll blame it on the glasses. Okay. He worked for the Heinz Family Office and the Heinz Family Foundation, and was the university's first photo archivist in Hillman Library, organizing the archives of the Industrial Society's Pittsburgh City Photographer Collection. Tonight, Frank will tell us about Pittsburgh history hidden in the stained glass windows of Heinz Chapel, and discuss some of the historical events depicted in the windows. And here's Frank.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to be back here. Hard to believe I addressed the Society 8 years ago on Colonel Schoonmaker, one of my favorite Pittsburghers, one of my Pittsburgh heroes. But this talk, yes, Helen said I'm a former docent at Heinz Chapel. I stepped down in February, and this is a brand new talk. I mean, these are ideas I had percolating in my mind because there are hundreds of figures depicted in the Heinz Chapel's windows. But I noticed over time there were people who were maybe small in scale, graphically represented, but they had a strong Pittsburgh connection. So I thought, well, I found 9. And I could make a talk out of this. So when Helen invited me to give a talk, I thought, this is great. It's a great avenue. It's great for me to do post-career at Pitt. By the way, I don't describe myself as retired because I know I'll always be doing something. Maybe even take another job. But my professional career is fitting. It began and ended at Pitt. As Helen mentioned, I began in the archives, Industrial Society at Pitt after grad school. And then after working for the Heinz family, I ended my career at Pitt. So this is sort of a full circle, and it's wonderful to be back here again. So yes, hidden history, and thanks to Helen. Oh, by the way, I owe a great debt of gratitude to both Helen and Audrey for getting me set up, because there was a flurry of activity with technology to have me be able to see this, but here we go. Now, on the left is a scene many of you well know. It's a classic view of Heinz Chapel from the lawn from the Cathedral of Learning. However, the view on the right is what you see these days. So in case this is not exactly hidden, but I thought I'd give you the background. The background's hidden perhaps to some of you, but there's the enormous scaffolding to the top of the chapel spire for flesh. That's because there's a multi-year, multi-tens, maybe $100,000 project to rebuild that spire. So in case you wonder about it, that's what's going on. It has been going on for a while. Well, the hidden history. Well, I'm going to begin, of course, with Charles Connick, whose studios made these windows. And sort of the hidden background of him. He was born in Springboro, up near Erie, Pennsylvania, and his father came to Pittsburgh and brought the family when he was hired by James Axtell and John Rush to be on the staff of their publication, The National Stockman and Farmer. Patricia Lowry, who many of you know, love that because of the research she's done in Axtell and Rush. By the way, they're connected to the recently demolished Presbyterian Church on Shady Avenue. And by the way, Rush and Axtell not only brought George Connick to Pittsburgh, resulting in his son being here and beginning a stained glass career, but they also brought Willa Cather to Pittsburgh to edit another publication. So interesting connection. And in Pittsburgh, there is only 1 degree of separation. Now, young Charlie, as he was known to his family and friends, Charlie Connick, was very gifted, seen by nature, as an artist. He was so good, he did sketches for the 2 Pittsburgh newspapers, the Pittsburgh Press and Pittsburgh Dispatch. And here are some examples of his working as an apprentice. He referred to himself as a cub apprentice artist for the Pittsburgh Press. And on the far left is it's a bicycle race that he drew on East Ohio Street in what was then Allegheny City, now the north side. To the left is a, now it doesn't look like a sporting event, but it was a, the pilot of a steamboat known as the Winnoa, owned by the Still family. I can't remember the name, but at any rate, there was a press boat called it was the Winnoa, and he was on it along with dignitaries and judges and mayor and so on. And so he sketched Captain John Phillips at the wheel of the yacht. And it was a yacht race. There were steam yacht races involved in Pittsburgh, up to Davis Island Dam from the point. And the other 2 are, there's a high jump event, and then boys atop a telephone pole, looks like viewing a race meet. Now the 2 may be hard to discern, but the 2 drawing to the left, he actually has his last name spelled out there, Connick. And the other 2 simply initialed them. All the illustrators for the newspapers incorporate their name either by initials or a name, so he did the same. But it's great to have these drawings showing the young Charles Connick's artistic career. He was such a good draftsman, it seemed, that he got the attention of Horace Rudy, who recently established a stained glass studio in Pittsburgh. And at the left, by the way, you can see there's a young Charles Connick in a stained glass studio, maybe Rudy's, I'm not sure, but you can see those drawings behind him are more masterful than the simple line drawings for the newspaper. Horace Rudy, shown on the right, is a young man, and the 2 maintained a friendship all their lives. But Horace Rudy is the man who gave him the start. And by the way, there's an interesting Heinz connection because Horace Rudy had a studio in York, Pennsylvania. He was brought to Pittsburgh to design stained glass windows for H.J. Heinz's home in his new factory on the north side. And Rudy had so much work from Heinz, and then he picked up additional work. He moved to Pittsburgh for a while, established a studio in Pittsburgh. For a long time, it was at Highland Center. Although in Connick's recollections, when he first went to work for Rudy, it was on Collins Avenue. I haven't found out exactly where, but anyway, it was on the East End. And another good example, Charles Connick's artwork is the upper left. That's a drawing he did for a stained glass window. I mean, really masterful work. I mean, so accomplished, and to translate that kind of drawing in stained glass was certainly a feat. And the stained glass window to the right of that drawing, it's called Knowledge, a Handmaid of Labor. That was made at Rudy studio after drawing that Charles Koenig did. And here's an extract from a letter Horace Rudy wrote to Koenig in the 30s, where he considered that drawing that Koenig did as one of his very best for stained glass. And by the way, the far right, now while that Knowledge, the Handmaid of Labor, is done for the Heinz Company Administration Building, on the right, that is a stained glass panel that Horace Rudy did for the Sarah Heinz house about the same time. And this is really hidden. Fortunately, something gone, but when Charles Koenig gave a recollection of his work in an address in Heinz Chapel in 1941, at that time he said he was happy to say that if you want to see his earliest work on his own, it was in this tiny little Episcopal church in Oakland, St. Mary's, on McKee Place. But unfortunately, Al Tandler, the late Al Tandler, and someone I missed, and I know many of you knew him, he looked into it and the windows are gone. So I'm putting this up here because, you know, those windows must be out there somewhere. Who would just destroy a wonderful stained glass window like Charles Koenig? But, and Koenig got this commission from Bishop Whitehead, the Episcopal Church at the time. So he was always eternally grateful, in a way, to Bishop Whitehead for giving him a start. And by the way, St. Mary's is no longer an active church. It's like so many churches in Pittsburgh. It was closed, but it has been repurposed, wasn't torn down, and is now apartments known as the Samuel Lofts. But now here to come to Koenig, where these stained glass windows were made. It's amazing, but the building in which Charles Koenig made these windows is still standing. It's called the Franklin. It's in the Back Bay of Boston at 9 Harcourt Street. And the right is an interior view of Koenig and some of his crew who worked there, and Koenig there with his watercolors on his left hand, working on a rendering of stained glass window. So Koenig established his own studio. After having worked for, besides Rudy, he went to work for other stained glass makers, but established his own studio in 1912. Now, Charles Koenig got wind of the fact that there's this chapel being built in Pittsburgh, needs stained glass windows, and he wrote to his old mentor, Horace Rudy, for information that he might be able to give him about H.J. Heinz and recollections himself. Whether he knew or not, I mean, Horace Rudy was also interested in having this job. Horace Rudy was one of the great stained glass makers and designers of the country, but by the 1930s, stained glass was really falling out of fashion. It was tough for Horace Rudy to make it. I mean, Charles Koenig did find a niche, but they were friends, but Horace Rudy didn't get commissioned, Koenig did. And here we have in 1933, it's the correspondence between John Weber. He was secretary at the University of Pittsburgh and also business manager, engineer, an engineer by training. He's the one who really, on behalf of Pitt, oversaw the building of the chapel. And it's interesting, those of you, I'm sure, who've been in the chapel, maybe all of you have, who has not been in Heinz Chapel here in the audience here? Everyone has been. I know some of you have been married, as Helen was in the chapel. Okay, another hand here. You just walk in that building and it's entrancing. You're in a jewel box because the colors coming through, blue's the predominant color there. And it's all great pattern. And you could just appreciate for its pattern, not realizing there are all these figures in the window, which, by the way, wouldn't upset Koenig. I mean, to him, light, the action of light is the most important thing. So if you went in and out of there and just were impressed with the play of sunlight through colored glass and hippie happy. All these figures that are bonus. And by the way, and the figures there are mostly folks from Western history, culture, religious history, and so on, some American history. But one of the early design schemes, I mean, Kurtik in his letter to John Weber in 1933 was saying that he was thinking, as he said, I think quite within the spirit, the finest, he was wanting to include people from Pittsburgh history, or Pennsylvania history, in fact. He names, yes, like Penn, Franklin, Stephen Foster, local personalities like Brashear, John Brashear, Erasmus Wilson, Samuel Church, and Andrew Carnegie. So that was his thinking early on, before the whole scheme was changed to have the present figures. In fact, one of the earliest proposals he made to Pitt for the windows, who should be in the windows, was really overt Pittsburgh history. At the top there you see this window number 14, devoted to industrial history of Pittsburgh, having coal mining, steel making, glass making, oil, food processing, even naming Westinghouse and KDKA. He was going to include all this in windows. It'd be marvelous. I kind of, in some ways, wish that he had carried out. I mean, really unique among any stained glass in the country to have all this local history celebrated. But I don't know the mechanics of it, but it was nixed, and we have what we have today. Not to be dismissive, but you know, as a historian, I'd love to see that local history. So that was 1933. This is 1936. There's Kurtik's contract with the University of Pittsburgh, January 30th, 1936. So he inked that in that year. October 1937, these windows are going on in. I mean, it's astounding. You know how complex those windows are. I just can't conceive of having the design made, shipped to Pittsburgh, and installed in a short amount of time. And by the way, I just want to show you the Charles Kurtik's signature as appears on that Pitt contract. And by the way, he signed the tallest windows of the chapel, the transept windows. And there it is, the same signature. Of course, in the window, copyright date, Boston, 1937. So the meat of it, the real subject, that was all prelude to what I'm getting to now. The first character I want to begin with, the first medallion. Here we have George Washington. He appears in the carriage windows. I mean, there are 4 sets of windows, 2 the north-facing wall, 2 in the south wall. And if you go in a clockwise motion, there's the tolerance windows, courage, then temperance and truth. So Washington perfectly, with him shown here at the harsh winter at Valley Forge, with his men. Kurtik made full use of the whole panel where these medallions, where these people were highlighted towards Washington. And the corners were spaces to have rondelles. And they were round pieces, inset pieces in which there's some bearing to that person's character, life, associates, whatever. So in this case, the 2 upper rondelles show British soldiers, and they have axes, axemen. And Kurtik didn't spell this out, but I bet they all 4 of these relate to Washington's prior life, long before the War for Independence, back when he was a young man, a militia officer for the Virginia Colonial Militia. And those 2, the redcoats with the axes, likely symbolize Washington's association with General Braddock on the march to Fort Duquesne. That was, of course, ended in Braddock's defeat. And Washington, by the way, he was there as a volunteer. He really longed to be a British officer, but they wouldn't accept him. So he thought he could attach himself as a volunteer aide-de-camp to Braddock, which he was. So those 2 upper rondelles, that's what my take on him for that. But the lower 2 have a direct bearing in 1753, Washington's mission to the French on behalf of the Virginia colonial government. So going to further illuminating this. To the left is the National Park Service map showing the route that Washington took from Williamsburg, the colonial capital of Virginia, all the way up to Fort LaBeouf, now at Waterford, Pennsylvania. But the window that will run down, I'm addressing first, deals with an episode when they're almost back to what's now Pittsburgh, and it's near Evans City. So there's a PMC marker there relating to a narrow escape from it's shots fired by an Indian. And by the way, the little map in the back was done by Florence Neff. It was in the Tribune Review showing the two routes. The route upward was the Venango Trail, and the route they took back just Gibson, Washington, was the Chenapin's Trail. And by the way, there's a group now marking the length of this trail, this very bold Washington Trail markers, Washington Trail 1753. So here we have Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie, shown at the lower left there. And as soon as Washington gets back to Williamsburg, he has his journal published, printed. So he cites the events of what happened on the return to make better speed. And it wasn't just Washington alone, certainly, or even Washington. Yes, there was a larger party that went north to Fort LaBeouf, but to make speed and haste on the way back, Washington guests went together alone in December. So the rundown at the right is kind of more hard to make out because Kurtik used red to depict these figures here, and it's hard to see, but there's an Indian crouching with a rifle at the lower right, and it's sorry, in the far left, it's this guest standing behind Washington. Washington's reaching out with his hand as a, like don't shoot or whatever. And according to Washington's account in his journal, he says that the shot didn't hit either of them, and that they took the Indian into custody, kept him until 9 o'clock at night, and let him go. Now, Gist kept a journal too. He had a slightly different account, slightly more maybe informed as a frontiersman. He said, maybe more gentle too in his approach, dealing with Native Americans. He said, upon which I said to the Indian, I suppose you're lost and fired your gun. Like, someone could find me. He said he knew the way to his cabin, and 'twas but a little way. Well, I said, do you go home? And as we were much tired, we will follow your track in the morning, and here's a cake of bread for you. And you must give us meat in the morning. He was glad to get away. I followed him and listened till he was fairly out of the way. Then we set out about half a mile, made a fire, set our compass, and then they set on their way and not stopping to get any meat. It could be another trap. Okay, the other rondelle there shows Washington Gist on the raft, this famous story. The 40th Street Bridge, his other name is the Washington Crossing Bridge. And so it's near that bridge that they try to cross the Allegheny, and the winter is filled with ice floes. And here, other people who record try to represent what happened there. The upper right is a representation by the mid-19th century artist Daniel Huntington, and below that is a more recent painting by John Buxton, more realistic, I would say. As Gist said in his journal, we set out early, got to Allegheny, made a raft, and with much difficulty got over to an island a little above Chenapin's town. The major, having fallen in from off the raft, and my fingers frostbitten, the sun down, very cold, we contented ourselves to encamp upon that island. It was deep water between us and the shore, but the cold did us some service, for in the morning it was frozen hard enough for us to pass over on the ice. And by the way, that island is not Hare's Island. That was a marketing scheme of the 1980s. So all us historians just cringe at that. It was likely an island had several names. McCullough's Island, Wainwright's Island, that is now part of the riverbank just below the 40th Street Bridge, land that was that channel was filled in and just made part of the shore now. But that's where they spent the night, just short distance. And by the way, Shanapinstown is a major Delaware village. The name comes from an early Delaware leader, and it is a very important point. So moving on, and we're still in the 18th century. By the way, these windows, these 9 figures represent the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, pretty widespread of time with Pittsburgh connections. So here's Daniel Broadhead, and he's not directly portrayed or a lot of artistic license, but also the carriage windows. And I should mention, each window has 2 lancets. The left lancet, they're all male figures. The right lancet's all female figures. So it's half and half women all the way around, which is quite interesting. And they go further. You go further back in time as you go higher in those windows, which is an interesting design element. So the Broadhead family is the legend on this medallion, and it notes the fleeing of Hester Broadhead, whose husband had just died, with the children from their home that was attacked by Delaware. And this is in 1755. This is the direct part of the aftermath of the failure of the Braddock expedition. The French still held on to Fort Duquesne. They reinforced their presence there. Their Indian allies were emboldened to make attacks on the English settlements, and all the way even extending to eastern Pennsylvania, where the Broadheads lived, near present-day eastern Pennsylvania. And by the way, some background here. There had been long simmering tensions over the place where the Broadheads lived, near present-day Eastland. There's a place called Dansbury, a Dansbury Manor, because it was land that was incorporated into the Pennsylvania colony by William Penn's sons. William Penn was considered to have dealt relatively fairly with Native Americans. His sons didn't have the same scruples. And there's an infamous episode called the Walking Purchase, where they made an agreement with the Delaware to buy more land. And it was as far as a man could walk in a day and a half. Well, the unscrupulous Penns hired the 3 fastest runners they could in Philadelphia, and they vastly took in much more terror than Delaware imagined. They were just incensed, and this was a long simmering point of contention all along, and so it's finally unleashed in this 1755 raid. So the Broadheads escaped that, and there's a PHMC marker there today, you see on the left, and below that there's nothing remains of it except that there's a cemetery at that site today. Well, one of the children was Daniel Broadhead. And by the way, Kurtik depicts this. It's this classic pioneer mother pose, mother and her bonnet, and so holding a young child, a bit older child at her side, sort of like Madonna Trail Monument you may have seen along Interstate or National US 40. In truth, the children much older by this time. Certainly Daniel was. He was probably late teens, maybe close to 20. Well, we find him again a couple decades later. He's in Pittsburgh. He's appointed commandant of Fort Pitt. And interesting relations with Indians. He's ordered by George Washington to make raids on the Seneca. I'll bring up the Seneca later in this talk. That figure importantly in Pittsburgh history, to make raids, not to kill them necessarily, but to disconcert them, burn their villages, burn their crops. It was a heart-wrenching raid made in, and then later on he's sent to Ohio, or what later became Ohio, to Coshocton, which was then the capital of the Delaware Nation. The Delaware were usually along the coast. They kept being pushed that further and further. Huntington, Pennsylvania was a capital, you might say, for the nation before this. And there are 2 groups of the Delaware, those who were more aligned with the Americans, some were certainly aligned with the British, and so there were Delaware and Coshocton who were pro-British, and that was the target of this raid. And nearby, at Nudden-Hutton, there were Delaware who were part of a Moravian mission. Well, Brodhead wiped out the Coshocton people, but then some more aggressive Americans wiped out the Nudden-Hutton. And so there is a very sad episode in American history relations with Native Americans there. But Brodhead is connected with it. So, moving on to the Seneca, we have a corn planter at the far left. This appears in the temperance windows, most appropriately. The temperance windows are in the south wall of the chapel, and near the bottom is an episode in Washington's life. Washington is portrayed 4 different times in the chapel's windows as general of the Continental Army, the 2 as a colonial militia officer, and then here as president. This is 1791. Corn planter journeys all the way. I mean, you complain today, at least I do, about the drive to Philadelphia and the turnpike. And, well, I just imagine going over, crossing them all on foot to get to Philadelphia. And by the way, Corn Planter did this a number of times, several times at least, to meet with Washington. And part of it is he wants to protect his people. And this is essentially what he goes to meet with Washington as head of the new United States government. And by the way, he's likely meeting in Washington. It was referred to as the president's house. I mean, long gone, but there's a rendering of it, which is about the center there. And one of his complaints is the traders bringing alcohol among his people and the deleterious effect alcohol is having on them. And that's what portrayed in that part in large right there in the middle. They're obviously, I mean, there are white men above, each holding a bottle. I mean, make it impress the fact with an obviously intoxicated Indian at their feet. So this tragedy, and that might, and Kurtik, I mean, he did amazing studies into history in general, and there was an episode that is related to in Corn Planter's own life, and he recounted to in Philadelphia, happened at Catfish Camp, which is now Washington, Pennsylvania, where he felt that Washingtonians took advantage of his people by getting them on drunken purpose and robbing them. And I found 1902 publication, which really does hone in on the subject of this window, about Corn Planter devoting himself to farming and pursuits of peace in his later life. For many years he labored faithfully to eradicate the habits of intemperance to which his people had fallen. And strange as it may seem, was the first temperance lecturer in the United States. He entertained the highest respect for Washington and visited him several times in Philadelphia. And that's amazing, highest respect for Washington, even though Washington ordered his Continental troops to pillage their villages. It's just hard to grasp here. And before leaving the subject, I want to point out there's another window that celebrates Washington and Corn Planter in Pittsburgh, and that's the Calvary Episcopal Church. That's the window you see on the far right there, with Washington there at the top, and Corn Planter at the left there, and the legend, Corn Planter pleads for his people. So we're leaving the 18th century to the 19th century, and it's Lewis and Clark who are portrayed in the carriage windows above Washington. In this case, it's honing in on just Meriwether Lewis. He is the member of the team who was based in Pittsburgh for a way as a member of the military. He was at Fort Fayette, which is now just in the vicinity of 9th and Penn, downtown Pittsburgh. And that's where he and his men were based. And one of the things that Meriwether Lewis was charged with was having a boat built in Pittsburgh, and there is his sketch from his own journal at the lower left. And since the big celebration for Lewis and Clark's beginning of the journey. I mean, now Pittsburgh is finally acknowledged as being the beginning of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And the upper right is a view of Pittsburgh about that time. So moving much further up in the 19th century, Frances Willard is also pictured in the Temperance windows along with Guy Susan Washington. And what connection does she have to Pittsburgh? I mean, she's a name long associated. You hear her name, you think of the Women's Christian Temperance Unit, and she was the long-time head of that organization, devoted to the abstaining from alcohol, or even making of alcohol. But she first came to Pittsburgh in the 1860s, and there she's shown with students on the far left, and she taught when it was downtown Pittsburgh, the predecessor of Chatham, then as the Pittsburgh Female College. She taught just briefly. She lived in and worked in Pittsburgh in the 1860s briefly, and it's later, after leaving Pittsburgh, that she established her reputation as a temperance leader. And by the way, I should say she came to Pittsburgh at the urging of a neighbor, Matthew Simpson, a noted bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, who recommended that she go teach there. And of course, he was also on the board of the college, so that gave her an entree to getting a position as a young woman starting out in education. And the photo at the far right shows her later in life when she came back to Pittsburgh. She came back a number of times, and let me see if I have a reference here. It's interesting, in her own autobiography, she recounts going along on a, excuse me, find a page here. I committed a lot of this to memory, but not everything. Yes, she stepped inside, and this is in her autobiography called Glimpses of 50 Years. She stepped inside a Market Street bar to join a group of women who marched through downtown, stopping one saloon after another to pray, sing hymns, and try their best to dissuade men from drinking beer and whiskey. So she made quite a different impression on Pittsburgh than she did as a young teacher, and she was back in several times. And the Daily Post extra at the top there is when she was back in 1887. But the big celebrated feature of her life, and that's why is she posing there with a large man. And he actually was one of the largest presidents, I'm sure, Grover Cleveland. She got her women's organization, which had members all across the world, to have a, by the way, the petition still exists. It's an enormous document. It's in a museum dedicated to Lord in New England. So it's signed by women all over the world. It's called the Polyglot Petition. Polyglot because of the makeup of all the women of all different cultures who signed this. So you might actually see an expression, Cleveland seems perplexed by this document. Like, what? Alcohol? Give up drinking? I mean, inconceivable. So she got nowhere with it. For all this effort, of course, her ideal did become a reality with the Prohibition Amendment of the Constitution. But she didn't live to see it, and of course, as we all know, it was repealed in 1933 after its 1919 passage. So let's move on to another female figure from the 19th century. That's Clara Barton. I only have one instance of her appearing in Pittsburgh, and it was in the 1868, where she gave an address in Masonic Hall, shown there downtown on Fifth Avenue. She was raising money for the benefit of Union soldiers who had been injured. And of course, during the Civil War, she was known as the angel of the battlefield for getting medical supplies to men who needed them during the Civil War. And And you see there in her window, the very top is the Red Cross flag, inspired by the International Red Cross, is founded in Switzerland in 1863. And so it's interesting, I have her here not only because she was in Pittsburgh, gave an address in Pittsburgh, but there's a Pittsburgh connection to the background there. It's the wreckage of the Johnstown flood. The first major effort of the Red Cross was to tend to victims of the flood. So it's their broken house behind, people actually doing actual cleanup after the flood there. Of course, we know the Pittsburgh connection with it because members of the South Fork Club, hunting club, I suppose it was, responsible. Thank you, Charlie. Hunting and Fishing Club. Thank you. Responsible for the dam not being properly kept in shape it should have had, released all of this water and wiped out Johnstown. As we all know, if anyone has read the Devin McCullough book, just a tragic event that could have been prevented. But anyway, this is just a great example of hidden history there, Pittsburgh in the windows. And moving forward, my last two figures, there are 5 aisle windows, and one of the aisle windows along the south wall of the chapel is inspired by the passage from Ecclesiastes, where there's now praise famous men. And there are 2 lines there. One has musicians, the other has writers throughout Western history. And there are 2 figures in it, and only 2 figures of people who, when they're living, lived into the 20th century. And they're Victor Herbert and Edward McDowell. Victor Herbert is shown there on the left. There's his just tiny little image. That's why I didn't really reproduce that well. And these photos I took, I blew them up, tried to edit them as much as I could, highlight them. And you may have known of Victor Herbert still might be known today because of his very famous Babes in Toyland, one of his most famous operettas. I mean, he did write some serious music, and especially his cello suites are still played today. But people would know his name, and there's a page in C marker in front of Carnegie's Music Hall, tribute to him. It's inside that hall that he conducted what was the Pittsburgh Orchestra at the time, now Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. A very short stint, only about half dozen or so years, but he was gone by 1904. And by the way, he lived on Aiken Avenue, across what's pretty much close to what's now Shadyside Hospital, for the duration of his time here. But he composed a lot while he was in Pittsburgh and conducting his orchestra. By the way, he's given credit for really honing that orchestra into performance standards of a national orchestra. He did take it on tour all over New York, Chicago, and he really made Pittsburgh serious music known around the country. And he didn't play just the standards, the composers from the 18th and 19th centuries, Mozart, Beethoven, etc. He put new composers on his schedule, including Edward McDowell, who's portrayed there with the right. And McDowell himself would tour doing piano recitals, including in Carnegie Music Hall. And by the way, after McDowell's death, his widow, Marion, made their farm in Peterborough, New Hampshire, which she bought just to have a refuge. In essence, a place away from it all where he could compose in peace during the summers. She made that into an artist colony, the McDowell Colony, which still exists to this day. Artists, musicians, writers still go there. By the way, Aaron Copland composed Appalachian Spring there. A number of writers have been there. Let's say Leonard Bernstein finished his mass there. Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town there, so high-profile connection. But Herbert certainly a supporter of Edward McDowell. And you wonder why I have this ASCII logo there. It's because Victor Herbert was largely responsible for the American Society of Composers and Publishers, I think.
Publishers.
Anyway, ASCII sorry, performers, thank you, that fits, thank you, Tom. There was a court case, there was Victor Herbert's music was being played in a restaurant in New York, and for restaurant patrons, but he wasn't receiving any royalties. So it was a test case made in court, and actually went to the Supreme Court, and Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. handed down a decision that recognized the fact that yes, artists should get royalties for whenever the music is performed, whether it's just background music. And so Victor Herbert became a director of ASCAP and was vice president until his death in 1924, which also makes him the nearest to our time that anyone died of anyone portrayed in the chapel windows. So now we come to the end. This is a bonus. It's not stained glass, but it is conic. At the time Conic is working on Heinz Chapel's windows, the University of Pittsburgh is about to celebrate its 150th anniversary. And Chancellor John Bowman, I left Bowman's name out of this. I mean, none of this would even happen without Bowman, because Chancellor Bowman, like the strongest chancellor ever at the University of Pittsburgh, one of the longest tenures. And by the way, when he left Pitt in the 1940s, he was the highest paid university president in the whole country for his success and what he could do. And I mean, he's the one who wanted the Gothic style, the Cathedral of Learning, which influenced the chapel. Because once again, Conic, H.J. Heinz left money for a building in more right as a mother, but it seemed to be, reading through the lines, that it was Conic who influenced the Heinz heirs to have their father's gift turned into a chapel to match his large, or as they called it, the tall building. He didn't much care for Cathedral of Learning as a name. While John Weber was really concerned with the nuts and bolts of this building on behalf of the university, John Bowman, the chancellor, was pretty much a guiding spirit, along with Howard Heinz, and how this turned out. And I don't have it on record, but whether Bowman actually approached Conic and asked for this, or Conic just wanted to do something nice for John Bowman University, he resigned the university logo for the bicentennial, and this seal was in use for decades after this, and that is what you see at the very top. There's a lamp, a light of learning in the middle, and the three sets of wavy lines are the three rivers. It's a nice, elegant, simple design, and that was, yes, Charles Conic's seal for the University of Pittsburgh. And by the way, I just like how the place is spelled out in the two shields below. You have a shield of Pennsylvania, the state we're in, and a shield of the city of Pittsburgh. Because it spells out you're at the University of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I just love that look. And by the way, the shield for the university goes along with the rest of the shields and the balustrades of the university, because if you look up sometime, you'll see all sorts of shields, and they're European and American universities and colleges all the way around. You'll get step neck by looking at it. You might want to have binoculars, but it's pretty cool to look at those features. It's one of the great things about the chapel. There's so many details to explore, and I still keep exploring this. And this is my post-leaving project as an homage to my former workplace. So thank you for your kind attention. I'll entertain any questions you might have.
Just saying that earlier in your talk, we were talking about the Revolutionary War generals like Gist and Dunwoody. Those are all streets in the hill. Because I wondered where one of those, I mean, Jamonville too, one of those.
Yes, if you can hear this out in the broadcast audience, an audience member from the back pointed out the fact that the names of Gist and other people with the French and Indian War appear on streets. Now that's true. Throughout the whole city, you have streets from various names in Pittsburgh history, as my friend Charlie will tell you right now. So yeah, good observation. Yes.
Have you written a book, or is there a book describing all these stories of the Heinz Chapel windows?
No, I mean there's a guidebook to the chapel, but it's very it just covers the basics here. Yeah, this little brochure you have there, and there's a little thicker book that is done, by Joan Gall in the 1990s. But nothing detailed. In fact, a lot of this I just discovered, this summer doing research. I just really delved into it. I mean, the things I was curious about myself. And when Helen asked me to give the talk, I thought I've got to get to work and do more research. So I learned a lot more in doing this. I'm happy to share this. So Caroline, you had?
Yeah, I'm gonna show my ignorance about the making of stained glass.
Oh, yeah.
So, can you say a little bit about how they were made? I mean, clearly there are pieces that are colored glass, but there are also pieces that are painted?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of detail of faces and...
Yeah, that's true. And by the way, that goes back to the very name of stained glass. It goes back to the technique in the earliest, probably the 12th century at least. Silver nitrate was used to paint glass and be fired. It would turn various shades of gray. And so that was the first. And then there were ways to incorporate colors. So yes, windows you see at Chartres or Notre Dame, I'm not sure about that, but anyway, medieval windows, yes, there are pieces that are the pure colored glass, but especially figures and clothing are painted, and that does go back centuries. Koenig, by the way, he's known for reviving at least the medieval look of stained glass in the 20th century. So yes, so what would happen first? First, there's an idea, various themes to have windows done. By the way, it's a unique situation with Heinz Chapel because all those windows were done at once in a whole ensemble. You rarely have that much money to do everything at once. I'm sure even in church, well, Calvary Episcopal is an example. There are windows by different makers at different time periods. A lot of times they'd be just plain glass until there's a donor. In this case, everything was done as an ensemble. And so the idea is the artist makes drawings, they're approved. And in this case, Koenig can make full-size cartoons, put them in a window. Unfortunately, all the real details are no longer extant, but whether it's Chandler Bowman, Howard Heinz, whoever approves them says, yeah, go ahead. So the drawings go back to Koenig's studio, they give them to the glass cutters, they cut the glass, and of course, the rendering. There's a rendering done in watercolor. And then after the piece are cut, again, I don't know what the steps. I'm no stained glass making expert, but the painting would be done, the pieces fired. When all the pieces were ready, they'd be put together with lead, shipped to Pittsburgh, crated up very carefully, I'm sure, and set in the walls. And by the way, there were bronze bars and bronze rods in the limestone walls. So everything is affixed to those rods. So they're fixed. There's tons of weight. Glass and lead, very heavy. So yeah, it's a mammoth project. So I hope that helps illuminate.
No, that does help.
Okay, good, thank you. So, anything else? Anybody? Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, when I remember going in there, I hitchhiked through all the medieval French cathedrals when I was at Louvain.
Oh.
But I was so struck by the blue and the reds, which is so like Chartres and like Notre Dame, where those are very basic medieval and very strong colors. I just wanted to, two things. One is there's no, and maybe they're there, but you didn't mention about there's no workers, laborers. Many stained glass, like in Homestead, had figures of different crafts and trades or steel workers, etc. The other, I want to make a comment on Native Americans. Is there workers in there?
Only in representation of the Old Testament. I mean, there are masons and so on, and one aisle windows, but no, unlike that early Koenig proposal I showed you, which would have had workers there. No, there are no workers. Yeah. There's much missing from these windows from the culture.
And those very tragic Native American, Putin is one of the most horrific, where they kill 150, 180 Delaware with mallets. They're accused wrongly of having been involved in raids along the Monongahela, and they definitely did not do it. They were Christians. They spent the night praying and singing Christian hymns before they were slaughtered. I mean, it's one of the darkest moments in our regional history, and the corn planter.
Yeah.
You know, the great song in the 60s about Kinsova Dam.
Right.
You know, George Washington promised this forever
Mhm.
to us, and here they're building this dam and it's flooding. Corn planter's grave had to be taken out at night and brought up into New York State, or the Iroquois land up there. I'm sorry, I cut you off on my comment.
Sure, no, I often say, yeah, because that's history we should all know. And by the way, Colonel Bright has a mission. He bypassed, I mean, his own people, his family joined the Moravian Church when they lived out with now Easton, and that's where the first Nadenhutten was. And then the Moravians, of course, they're being pushed further west, and so the Ohio Nadenhutten's there, and so they bypass it. His mission is to get through the Delaware who were in Coshocton. So he leaves them alone, but it was other soldiers who weren't controlled who did that massacre.
And of course, Lewis and Clark. Lewis starting out, what always I felt was totally lost in the story was the fact that it was the rebellion in Haiti, the successful rebellion and the defeat of Napoleon's army in Haiti. He had planned to retake Haiti and then use that as a jumping off point for New Orleans and west of the Mississippi, and it was the defeat of the 30,000 troops, 50, 60 ships. Land in Haiti are defeated by Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines, and that's what gives us, of course the poor Native Americans had nothing to say about it, and but it gives us 7 or 8 states from the victory of the Haitians. It seems we owe them something.
That's true, yes, I recall it from your city at the point, yes. Okay, anybody else? Well, if not, once again, is there another? Oh, I'm sorry.
Are there
Yes.
any windows or figures that you are not sure about, or you're doing research on currently, or that you plan to get to?
Well,
Mysteries.
everyone is named. I mean, there's a list in Connick. And by the way, Connick's drawing, all his files were deposited with the Boston Public Library, and MIT digitized them. So it's great.
Oh, wow.
It's a good sit at your desk and do research. That's how I was able to get that one scheme there. So he named everyone. And again, he had an encyclopedic knowledge of who was who, what they meant. I mean, he spells out things so well in his descriptions. He writes about his windows. There's probably no other stained glass artist does. And by the way, Charlie, yes, blue is his favorite color. He sees so many dimensions to blue. That was his favorite light. Yeah. But yeah, to your question, no, there's no one I'm currently working on. But I was just always intrigued by the fact that there were some Pittsburgh connections. Yeah. So anybody else? Well, yes.
In your opinion, just based on the orientation of the building, what wall or what set of windows looks best at any time of year, depending on how the light shines in? Do some of them stand out and look more vivid, or do they all look equal to you? Or
Well, they look equally, and that's not by accident. Connick adjusted the colors and the glass to the way the light hit it. So he purposely tried to make the windows on the north side light gets the least light.
okay,
The south-facing windows get the most light. But see, the windows change so much by the day, by the hour, by the season. So it's experienced differently. It's changing all the time.
Sure.
So to me, it's just like it's all one. I don't have a favorite myself. Although I must say, the western light, yeah. At the end of the day, the light coming in from the windows above the main entrance that faces the west. I mean, sometimes the sun is so bright,
yeah,
it really does illuminate the interior. Yeah,
thanks.
sure. Well, listen, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, one more.
I was wondering, how much time and effort did you put into this project?
Well, I thought maybe we could do this in a couple of days, but there's more than hours than I thought, but it's worth it. I mean, I want to share this, so it's a labor of love. So I don't know, dozens of hours I spent on this. Yes. So, again, thank you for your kind
Thank
attention.
you.
I appreciate the challenge.